Hey, this week we're talking about ways to become spiritually alive in 2025. And today I want to begin with scriptural text from the book of Numbers. Now, this is talking about God's people as they have come out of Egypt. And they've gone through the Red Sea. They're on their way to the Promised Land. But things are becoming more and more difficult. And finally, a group of people, in fact, the biblical writer gives you his opinion of them by the second word here. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, if we only had pots of meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onion, and the garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We've never seen anything but this manna. Now, William Bridges, in a great book called Transitions, says it took a few weeks or months, we're not exactly sure how long, it took to get the people, God's people, out of Egypt. But it took 40 years to get Egypt out of God's people. In other words, their habits, their attitudes, their ways of acting and living and thinking were really deeply embedded in them. Really, because of hundreds of years of slavery and living in that pagan environment. So, habits and attitudes are hard to break. Mark Twain said he's easy to quit smoking, he quit 1,000 times. So, those habits really are hard to break. And we find these people, they've gone from being slaves and being dependent to being in the wilderness and having to make decisions on their own, how they're going to live, what they're going to do. And what happens is they lose the ability, or they've never had the ability, to be able to live on their own. And they're making decisions, they're walking, they're having to sometimes fight, they're having all these things. And they decide they want to go back. They want to go back to Egypt, to slavery. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine wanting to go back to Egypt, slavery? Now, I admit, when I was young and I heard this about pots of meat, I thought they wanted to go back to get potted meat. You ever had potted meat before? We used to have potted meat. And I tell you, I hadn't had it in 40 years and I really hadn't missed it. But it is, however good it was, it's not worth becoming a slave again. And I think we need to think about that when we are thinking about looking back in what sometimes people call revisionist history about how things used to be. Sometimes when we're struggling, we look out and we say, oh, it was not that bad. But I know from talking to counselors, addiction counselors and everything, when you're working through that, for example, sometimes people say, I'm not getting any better. And then you say, well, used to, how often were you triggered? 30 times? Think about it. Probably now it's 10 times a day. We have to really focus on something like that. And remember, what is it worth going back to where you were? Or sometimes you really don't know how good the future or the promised land is going to be. So don't settle for potted meat in 2025. Try to be more spiritually alive. Listen, God bless you. I hope to see you soon. Come see us at First Baptist Cramerton.